Welcome to the Friendly Podcast Guide, sorting through podcasts so you don't have to. I'm Andy Smiley, and I want to help you discover the right podcast without having to listen to an entire episode. Now, let's talk podcasts. Hi there. I can't wait for you to meet, via my podcast, the host of this week's podcast. Kate Wallinga is the host of Ignorance Was Bliss, and she is confident in herself and has such a unique way of looking at things. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with her. Before you get to metaphorically sit down with her, here are some details about the show. Kate describes the show as a podcast about how we become who we are. Almost anything can seem normal. Are you sure you really want to know? The length of each episode is about an hour. The series is ongoing with new episodes available several times a month. Before we learn more about the vibe of the show, we're going to take a quick break to talk about my free guide to find podcasts you'll love. I hope you're excited about Ignorance Was Bliss, but if you're not so sure if it's a good fit for you, I have a guide that can help you find a podcast you will love. The guide has 9 different types of podcasts like history, parenting, and health and wellness. And under each type of podcast, there are links to 3 different shows. That is 27 different podcasts for you to choose from. If you try a couple and you don't like any of them, I put my email at the bottom of the guide so you can email me and I will personally help you find a podcast you will love. Now we get to hear from Kate about the hard things that happened in her life to bring her to start a podcast. Today we have Kate Wallinga from the Ignorance Was Bliss podcast, and I am super excited to talk to her. Kate, can you introduce yourself a little bit to my listeners?
Sure. I am a former forensic psychologist and crisis clinician. I broke my back in 2014, which is a terrible idea. Don't do that. And I spent 3.5 years sitting home feeling sorry for myself, which, as we know, can be a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I really threw myself into that for a little bit. And then I kept listening to podcasts and I kept thinking, why are they asking these questions? I was listening to a lot of true crime podcasts or psychology or history podcasts. What does it mean if somebody is not guilty by reason of insanity? Or what is anxiety? What is schizophrenia? What is competency? Things like that. And every time I'd be sitting alone on my couch 6 months after the podcast has actually been recorded, answering out loud.
Sure.
To my cats, telling them. And I finally kind of realized, like, hey, maybe I should just start my own show. And so that's where Ignorance Was Bliss started. And this would be another piece of it is that I have 4 children. And at the time, also, my father was living with us. And I've been married for 1,000 years. And it was on New Year's Day of 2018 where I kind of hit a wall. And I went up, and depending on who's telling the story, I either gently tapped my husband on the shoulder or I grabbed him by the shirt collar and pulled him real close. And I said, I'm going to start a podcast. And being a smart man, his answer was, okay.
That sounds like a pretty good origin story.
I was literally sort of losing my voice, being on disability and feeling like I'm no longer playing a lead role in my own life, that now I'm playing a supportive role in their lives, and that's it. And I needed something that was mine and that forced them to shut up. And so it started as a true crime or sort of true crime adjacent thing, trying to answer some of the questions that I was hearing. After maybe 50 or 60 episodes, I decided I don't want to stay just in the true crime space, because I want to talk to other creators, and because the true crime space can get a little sensationalistic and voyeuristic at times. And so I want to pull the lens back, and I just want to talk to anybody. So that's where we are now, creeping up on 5 years later, over 400 episodes later. It's not an addiction. I can stop anytime I want.
Truly, 5 years is quite the accomplishment. I feel like it's hard to stick to just about anything for 5 years. So that's pretty awesome. What do you want people to get out of your podcast?
It depends on the episode, really, because every episode is unique to my guest. So early on, it was very scripted and very planned and structured. And I realized that's not me, that I light up and I do the best when I'm bouncing things off somebody else. And so after a while, I stopped planning and I sort of literally sign on with somebody. We do a little bit of housekeeping at the beginning, and then I hit record and we throw stuff at the wall and see what happens, see what sticks. And so there are some that are raucous and hilarious. There are some that are dark and scary. I've talked to other podcasters. I've talked to lawyers. I've talked to sex workers. I've talked to priests. I've talked to convicted murderers. You can decide which of those is the scariest out of the list.
Totally. Okay. So I feel like you kind of just said it, but is there like a certain vibe that you're going for? It sounds like it's kind of like whatever that episode brings is what it is, but is there like a through line for you, or is it kind of just come as it comes as it comes?
It very much comes as it comes. It's very much about what the person brings to me in my job, which is picked up through my training in psychology, but I try not to be a psychologist. On my show, I try to share my own stories. There are people who would argue that I talk too much on my own show, which is fine. I accept that. It's probably true. But
What's your show?
It's exactly right. And it's about bouncing back and forth off the person that I'm with. And so there are episodes where I'm, dropping the F-bomb and I'm laughing with people and we're all just having a grand old time. And then like I can think of one maybe 6 months ago from when we were recording, where I was speaking to the mother of a murder victim, and we hit record and she just had to tell her story. She had things to say and she didn't feel like anyone had listened. And I figured out pretty quickly that my role here is to sit back and shut up and listen. And so I don't think I say a word for the first 45 minutes of that episode.
Wow. Yeah, that is different vibe. But apparently that's what needed to happen for that episode.
Right.
Cool. So with that, do you have a favorite episode or a couple of episodes?
I flatly refuse because it doesn't matter what my favorite is.
Sure.
That it depends on what my guests need to get out of it. Like, it's really important to me that nobody ever regrets coming on my show. It also depends on what my audience gets out of it.
Sure.
It's not about, like, I've had some bigger names. I hate that visual quotes, big names. I don't like that. But I've had some relatively famous people on the show, and that may get me more downloads, but those aren't necessarily the most powerful or impactful episodes. And so it really depends on what you're looking for. Like, I deliberately mix it up so that any 2 consecutive episodes should not have the same feel or the same moral of the story, if you will. And so I don't have a favorite because they all are.
Sure. I love that. Okay. So I feel like it's kind of obvious, but I always ask because my main listeners are moms. Is your podcast okay for little ears?
My podcast is not safe for work.
Okay.
Small children or houseplants at times. Once in a while it is, like once in a while, some episodes are, but by and large, I have it marked explicit because it's aimed for an adult audience at any rate.
Is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't touched on yet?
My show is meant to be, not every episode is meant for every person. Do you know what I mean? And so once in a while, I'll have a listener tell me, like, I've listened to every episode, and I'm like, are you okay? Like, my kids don't listen to me that much. Why would you? Like, bless your heart, like, good for you. But, oh God, are you not tired of me? I'm tired of me. How are you not tired of me? So that's just it's meant to be like dip in and dip out. If it's a topic or a person that is of interest to you, then hang out for an hour. And if you're like, no, this isn't for me, no worries.
Totally. Okay. That's good to know. I feel like, yeah, because some podcasts almost build on each other, but it sounds like yours are like, come in for an hour, see you in a couple months if none of the rest of them work for you for a bit.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right.
I love that. Okay. And where can people find you?
I am on iwbpodcast.com, iwbpodcast@gmail.com, and iwbpodcast on all of the social medias.
Fabulous. I will make sure to link all of that in the show notes so people can jump straight to where they want to go. And thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you know someone who could use ignorance is bliss in their life, will you share this episode with them? And if you want a free guide to find a podcast that you will love, click on the link in the show notes, and I will help you find a podcast you are excited about. Talk to you soon.
Oh, kids ruin everything. And not necessarily in a bad way, but they definitely ruin everything.
Yeah. They just change the dynamic of every single part of your life. Like,
right.
There's nothing that's untouched.
Right.